High atop the mesas of the high desert, an ancient power once looked over the people and the land. Its wings shimmered with the faint residue of past storms, and its gaze watched for any sign of threat from the silent horizon. The elders spoke of this being as the Thunderbird, a guardian who wielded the power of the skies. Its mission was to preserve balance, bestowing rain upon the earth when the arid winds threatened to take over. Over many seasons, the Thunderbird had vanished from everyday sight, retreating into memory and legend. But in the hearts of those who believed, it remained an ever-present possibility on the edges of clouds, a promise of life-giving rain in a land where dryness could rule for seemingly endless days. All the while, the people who lived in the scattered hogans beneath the open skies were in the grip of a deepening drought. Mountain creeks dried to dust, and the once lush desert flowers shriveled, leaving behind a brittle grey carpet of brush. Cattle found little to graze, and farmers spent grueling hours trying to coax water onto their parched fields. Where water once flowed freely from the snowfall atop distant peaks, now only the memory of that shimmer in the distance reminded the community of more bountiful time. Each sunrise felt oppressive, the sun an unrelenting disk beating down from dawn to dusk. One day, an extraordinary hush fell across the canyons. The roadrunners were silent, their usual darting strut subdued as they sought scraps of shade along the red rocks. Children and elders alike felt the weight of the silence pressing in, and worry scrawled itself onto every weathered face. That evening, an old Navajo elder named Grandmother Atsa shared a dream that had visited and unsettled her slumber. She had seen a beast formed entirely of cracked earth, gnarled cacti spines, and drifting sands. Its mouth was dry as a bone, and wherever it roamed, the sweet water lines sank into the ground as though devoured. She called it the drought demon, a being that thrived on withering fields and bone-dry lungs. Her voice, usually gentle, trembled when she told her vision. This was not a mere fairy tale, but rather a message. It was something the tribe had to heed with immediacy, or else the land would remain barren under the demon's relentless thirst. Grandmother Atsa, stubborn in her old age and deeply connected to the stories of her ancestors, believed that only one entity could challenge a force of that magnitude. She spoke quietly of the Thunderbird, a mysterious figure so rarely glimpsed that many questioned whether it lived in the material world at all. According to old accounts, the Thunderbird crafted arrows of lightning from heated stones in the heart of storm clouds. Each arrow once hurled from the Thunderbird's bow carried the power of thunder, cracking the sky open to unleash torrents of rain. If the Thunderbird could be convinced to forge enough arrows, perhaps it could strike down the drought demon and restore water to the land. Few among the tribe knew how to contact such a legendary figure. The last known story of direct communion with the Thunderbird came from stories well over a century old, told to generations around the fires. Those stories spoke of a hidden place, an ancient cave carved near the top of distant cliffs, where the Thunderbird's storms sometimes gathered. But no living person had ever found it. Many believed it was only a myth, used by parents eager to stir a sense of wonder and fear in their children. Yet with the present crisis unfolding, Grandmother Atsa insisted there was no other recourse. If they did not attempt to find this hidden sanctuary, the tribe might watch their entire land transform into a dust bowl of sorrow and decay. A small group assembled around her. Among them was Shaili Kiachin, a young man known for his bravery and for the deep empathy he carried in his chest. Though he was a skilled herder by both necessity and tradition, he had never walked far beyond the known valleys. Beside him stood Yustuadalo, a quick-witted runner who could traverse rocky terrain with ease. Together, they listened to Grandmother Atsa describe the cliffs, how, during winter, distant suns dared not illuminate the cave's entrance, and how the stony passage could open only during a certain alignment of the moon. It sounded like a tall tale, Yet Yidashoran felt a tug in his heart, an echo of urgency urging him forward. For days they prepared meticulously, gathering water skins, travelling packs with rations of jerky, and small blessings from Grandmother Atza. By the time the moon was nearly at the stage she had described, they deeded their livelihoods, sheep, goats, farmland to neighbours' care, and set out for the rumoured domain of the Thunderbird. The journey took them west across red sand dunes, where the wind carried grains of grit into every stitch of clothing. Thorns ripped at their legs and fatigue set in quickly. For days they travelled across high bluffs that offered a wide view of the land below, which was heartbreakingly barren. Chiayin and Yisdal kept each other's spirits up by sharing stories of home, improvising songs, and reciting small prayers to keep them focused. Now and then, they found the faintest trickle of a spring, enough to dampen their parched throats. Despite the harsh conditions, they believed in the purpose of their journey. At last, they arrived at the foot of a great cliff, whose face was so sheer and imposing that even the most skilled climber might balk. Craggy ridges and jagged outcrops gave the cliff a fierce aspect, as though it were an ancient guardian blocking the path to hidden wonders. Sunset painted the stone with shades of russet and gold, revealing faint carvings that looked suspiciously like thundercloud motifs. Sensing that the entrance might lie above, the pair sought the safest route, winding along narrow ledges. As they edged around corners, the wind howled in sudden bursts, threatening their footing. Finally, at a certain bend, they caught sight of a small, half-concealed opening, illuminated by the last sliver of sun. Fear prickled in their chests, though neither admitted it openly. The cave's entrance was flanked by a pair of stone pillars that resembled wings folded against each other. Mina noticed the ground near the entrance was littered with peculiar shards that looked like bits of obsidian, perhaps remnants of the Thunderbird's forging. If Grandmother Atza's tale were true, the air inside the cave was oddly charged, as though a storm cloud had been confined within the stone walls. With hesitant steps they ventured in, guided by a lantern's flicker. From the first moment they crossed into that ancient domain, an eerie chorus of echoes surrounded them. It was as though the cavern had recorded centuries' worth of howling wind and thunder. Each footstep reverberated into a deep hush. Strange shapes marked the walls, images of winged figures and swirling storm clouds etched by an unknown hand. Farther in, a wide chamber opened up, its ceiling tall enough to swallow the lantern's light. The faintest glimmer from above caught Shijian's eye. Something perched near the highest recess of stone. A gentle current of air circled the large chamber, stirring the dust in a slow spiral. Then, without warning, a thunderous presence filled the space. Standing on an outcrop was a creature of raw majesty, an immense bird with feathers the colour of stormy twilight, outlined by arcs of crackling light. Its eyes gleamed intelligence and an age beyond measure. This phenomenon was the Thunderbird. One look at it made Shilichian and Yeasdale lose their words, choking on equal parts awe and fear. Each tried to gather the courage to speak, but found themselves silent in the presence of a legend made flesh. Finally, Shilichian, swallowing his trepidation, stepped forward. In a voice that trembled at first, he recounted the dire state of their homeland. He told of the drought that had ravaged the fields, the rivers reduced to trickles, and the unyielding dryness that gnawed at both body and spirit. Then he spoke of the dream that Grandmother Atza had witnessed, the looming threat of a vicious drought demon feeding on the land's moisture. The Thunderbird's intense gaze never left him. It seemed to be gauging the sincerity in the young man's plea. When he finished, the chamber remained still, save for a distant rumble that might have been the Thunderbird's breath echoing off the cave walls. Then, with an avian grace, it spread its massive wings. A lightning arc danced along the edges of its plumage, sending fleeting shadows across the stone. In that shimmer, Sheizria and Sheizria Yizdotanojo sensed acknowledgement, if not agreement, then at least a willingness to listen further. The wind inside the cave carried a brief whisper like distant thunder, and the two visitors felt a subtle shift in their minds, as though the Thunderbird was speaking through wind and storm. The message they received was one of caution and solemn resolve. The forging of lightning arrows was not a trivial undertaking. Each arrow required special materials, the essence of thunderclouds, the molten heat of the sky, and the will of the Thunderbird to harness it. Additionally, any mortal who watched the forging from too close risked their own life force being entwined in the process. Nonetheless, the Thunderbird's tone carried a promise. If they could withstand the forging's ordeal, the Thunderbird would join them in the final battle against the drought demon. Thus began a frightening yet wondrous vigil. Night after night, Shile and Yistazelu remained in the cave, watching from a safe distance as the Thunderbird perched on a crag in the middle of the chamber, the air around it alive with electric tension. In a smoky swirl of clouds, the Thunderbird concentrated its power. The cave ceiling opened in a magical manner, revealing a slice of stormy sky. Bolts of lightning arced downward, striking a cluster of the obsidian shards, heating them to a brilliant white. Swiftly, the Thunderbird's beak and talons shaped these molten rocks into shafts, fletching them with shimmering feathers coaxed from its own wings. A thunderous crack announced each arrow's completion, scattering fiery sparks across the cavern floor. Seri and Yestere Ulau shielded their faces as the energy coursed through the cave, one brush with it enough to send them sprawling in shock. But they held strong, their commitment unwavering. They too were forging themselves in endurance, preparing for what lay ahead. Each day, they rationed their provisions more carefully, chewing dried strips of meat and sipping water so sparingly that their tongues felt perpetually dry. They dared not leave the cave for fear the Thunderbird might vanish before their mission was complete, and each evening the forging resumed with more grandiosity. Lightning hammered the stone, the Thunderbird's wings crackled with raw energy, and more arrows took shape. Over the span of several nights, a small quiver of lightning arrows came to be, each arrowhead glowing faintly with a whitish-blue light as though storm clouds lived inside the stone. Finally, the Thunderbird ceased the forging. The chamber grew still, the last echoes of hammering thunder reverberating over the walls. A stifling air of resolution replaced the swirling energies. The Thunderbird surveyed its work, then turned to the two watchers. Shai Wayen and Yezd Diarro realized the forging had cost their avian ally dearly. The Thunderbird's posture was stooped with exertion, its once brilliant feathers slightly dulled, though still formidable. Now, to dispatch the drought demon, they would need to lure it to a place where the Thunderbird could strike with full force. The demon thrived on dryness, and so it would likely come to any place where moisture threatened to return. They needed to prepare a final battleground, a place in the desert where the Thunderbird's lightning might break the demon's grasp once and for all. Descent from the cave proved more daunting than the climb up. A quiver of lightning arrows pulsed in Shi Zhuyan's arms with an unstable energy, as though the sky itself trembled within each arrowhead. He and Yishtala inched step by step along the cliff's edge, mindful that any accidental strike or misaligned step could unleash a bolt that might harm them. The Thunderbird drifted overhead, its wide wings fanning out in a slow circle. Gradually they crossed barren plateaus and marched for another day until they reached a useless riverbed near the tribal lands. The ground was cracked, the earth sallow from thirst. Low dunes of powdered sediment lay where waters once ran. This was as good a spot as any for the final confrontation. The dryness was severe enough to attract the demon, yet the wide sky overhead provided ample space for the Thunderbird to summon storms. In silence, they arranged a makeshift circle of stones in the dried riverbed. Then, following Grandmother Atsa's teachings, Shady Cheyenne placed among the stones small offerings, cornmeal, white shells, turquoise chips, tokens of invitation for benevolent spirits, and a sign of devotion to the land. Istallal ran through the desert, calling out a chant in hopes of drawing the drought demon's attention, invoking the dryness of the earth and demanding it come forth for its final reckoning. With each verse, a strange quiver rippled through the air, as if the demon could hear the entreaty. The sky overhead remained cloudless, but an uneasy hush blanketed the horizon. All at once, the earth began to tremble. A gust of scorching wind swept across the riverbed, throwing dust devils into the air. Slowly, out of the wavering heat, a colossal figure materialized. Its skin seemed made of cracked clay, and each movement shed flakes of dust and thorn. Its hollow eyes burned with a dryness that pulled moisture from the air. This entity stood easily twice a man's height, and a stench of decay wafted from its body. The drought demon had come. Shaishinen and Susaitya felt their throats parched at the mere presence of this being. They could sense the moisture in their bodies being tugged outward, as if the drought demon's mere existence threatened to suck the last drop of water from their cells. They held their ground, their hearts pounding hard. High above, the Thunderbird hovered, silent. This was the moment they had risked all to reach. With a rasping hiss, the drought demon lunged forward, deliberately cursing the land with its presence. Great fissures formed where it stepped, severing any chance of water flow. Its claws raked through the soil, scattering the offerings and dismissing them with contempt. Yustek was the first to act, sprinting in a wide arc around the demon to distract it. The demon's thirst-laden gaze locked onto him, diverting some of its draining power. Meanwhile, Shai Lichian steadied his trembling hands, drew one of the lightning arrows from the quiver, and knocked it into a simple bow he'd carried since childhood. Even before he released the arrow, a sizzling tension sparked along its obsidian tip. The contained lightning desperate to break free. Summoning his resolve, Shirlek Churchian let the arrow fly. A thunderous crack exploded in the air as the arrow soared in a streak of brilliant white blue. The demon twisted, its clay-like skin smoldering where the lightning impacted, leaving a charred crater in its side. Screeching in fury, it staggered back, flailing with a crooked arm. The ground trembled from its roar, a dreadful lamentation that threatened to make the sky buckle. Chien saw steam rising from the demon's wound, a sign that the lightning arrow had indeed reached deep. Up above, the Thunderbird unleashed a long cry that echoed across the desert. Thunderheads gathered from nowhere, swirling overhead in a vortex of dark, roiling clouds. Lightning flickered in that mass, illuminating the desolate land for miles around. Then, with a mighty wing beat, he released the arrow from high above, letting it streak down in a bolt of formidable fury. The demon tried to dodge, but the arrow clipped its shoulder, scorching off large chunks of hardened clay. Dust burst everywhere, and the demon stumbled. A savage anger laced its next roar, a sound that made the air itself crack and swirl with dryness. Sensing its survival teetered precariously, the drought demon thrust both arms forward. A surge of scorching wind radiated outward, laced with swirling grit. Xia Zhunyi was knocked onto his back, his eyes stinging as the breath was nearly torn from his lungs. Yishdodok took refuge behind a boulder, pressing himself against the rock to avoid being carried away by the wind. Even the Thunderbird faltered, buffeted as it tried to stay airborne against the violent gust. Dust devils spun faster and faster, funneling the desert's dryness into a suffocating wall of grit it became nearly impossible to see. Struggling to keep his eyes open, Shei fumbled for another arrow. He could barely see the quiver in the chaos. Realizing this might be their only chance at victory, he clasped an arrow whose tip glowed a fierce, pulsing light. Steadying the bow in his aching arms, he prayed for guidance, for strength to fire true. He let out a breath, met the drought demon's hollow eyes, and released. In that moment, the Thunderbird sensed his shot and conjured a bolt of lightning from the sky that seemed to merge with the arrow in mid-flight. A deafening roar overtook the battlefield, and everything vanished into white brilliance. It felt as though the atmosphere itself tore open. Lightning coiled around the demon, swallowing it in a spiral of searing brilliance. For an instant, the demon's shape was outlined, limbs flailing as the ground beneath it cracked open. Then came the sound of clay shattering, A final ear-splitting roar echoed, and the demon's form collapsed into a dull, powdered husk. The surging dryness that had once emanated from it dissipated like a hot breath, leaving only swirling dust behind. When the radiance lifted, the drought demon was no more. The hush that followed felt charged with an unbelievable sense of relief. The air carried a new texture, a moisture-laden coolness that everyone could feel in their pores. Overhead, the thunderclouds still spun, but now they released a gentle, almost tentative patter of rain. Wisps of steam rose from the sun-baked earth with each falling drop. Shilin Cheyenne and Yisteatl stared in weary wonder at the fresh moisture spattering their arms. All around them the parched land drank in this gift with a greed born of desperation. High above, the Thunderbird let out one last piercing call. It soared upward, coaxing the clouds to open further. Rain fell with increasing force, turning the dusty ground into pools of mud. Ledges once barren trickled with rivulets of water. Shishidu raised his face to the sky, letting the drops wash away grime and exhaustion. Yishidu rushed toward him, his voice cracking as he laughed, joy radiating from his very being. They embraced amid the pouring rain, their mission accomplished. The demon was defeated, and the Thunderbird had reclaimed its ancient vow to protect the land. In time, the rains seeded new life across the desert. Blossoms emerged, covering the once dead fields in a riot of color. The tribe's fields revived, and water again trickled in the previously dry riverbeds. Grandmother Atsa sensed this transformation in her bones even before the villagers carried the good news. She arranged a simple celebration of thanks, acknowledging the cycle of life renewed. In humble humility, the people told stories of what had transpired, how the Thunderbird returned to forge lightning arrows, and how it overcame the dreaded drought demon at last. Though many might never witness such events with their own eyes, the promise of sky-born guardianship was woven anew into the living tapestry of their land. Days later, when Shiestien Yizdial Welu returned, the village greeted them like heroes. Children gathered around, clamoring for them to recount the epic confrontation. Yizdalolo, with his quick wit, described the moment the demon fell, underscoring the vivid arcs of lightning overhead. Shilin, more reserved, simply smiled. He remembered the unstoppable dryness that seeped into his bones in the demon's presence, and the awesome resonance of the Thunderbird's cry. His heart brimmed with gratitude that they were able to safeguard their home. Still, not all was restored to perfect harmony. The forging of the arrows had drained the Thunderbird's energies, and it needed time to recover in solitude. Occasionally, in the midst of a thunderstorm, if one peered closely at the sky, they might see a flicker of that stormy silhouette perched among the clouds. And the people understood better than ever that their harmony with the land was both delicate and sacred. They took greater care in their relationship with water, respecting its source and the cycles of nature. At the next gather-round fire, Grandmother Atsa introduced a new tale into the tribe's oral tradition, of how, when a monstrous dryness threatened the very essence of life, brave souls sought out the legendary guardian of the skies. She would describe the forging of lightning arrows and the final battle at the dry riverbed, painting it in lush detail. Young children listened spellbound, eyes wide with awe. Elders kept time on drums, the rhythm weaving in the thunder's distant rumble. Though some might doubt the more dazzling aspects of the story, none could deny the revitalized fields and flowing streams right before their eyes. On nights when the moon hung ripe and silvery above the desert, Shaikiyin sometimes found himself gazing west toward the distant cliffs. He offered silent thanks to the guardian that had heard their plea. In his mind's eye, he saw again the lightning forging in that echoing cavern. He remembered the tangible sense of power as each arrow took shape, and the thunderous might that kissed the earth at the moment of the final blow. The memory humbled him, reminding him that such immense forces must be handled with both courage and reverence. Seasons passed, Rains fell more regularly, and the desert achieved a precarious equilibrium. People busied themselves with sowing and harvesting. Wild creatures returned to the once empty watering holes. In many ways, life resumed a comforting familiarity. Yet, the memory of that drought and the demon's withering power lingered in the collective consciousness of the tribe. Now, that knowledge served as a cautionary tale that dryness and adversity could creep upon the land if not carefully guarded against. Years later, as Shelcrean matured into a father himself, he gathered his children around a small fire outside their family hogan. They huddled close, bright eyes reflecting the embers. In a quiet voice, he told them the story of how he traveled to the Thunderbird's cave to plead for help, a place where the very air crackled with energy. He recounted forging nights filled with lightning's blaze. He told how the final battle tore open the sky. When he described the moment the drought demon was struck by arrows of living lightning, his children gasped, holding each other's hands in suspense. Though they had heard a shorter version before, this deeper recounting captivated them. In the hush that followed, rain began to patter softly on the desert floor, a final punctuation to his tale, a gentle reassurance that storms still walked among them. At the end of each retelling, Xiaxuing would remind his children and all who listened that throughout life, the land's well-being is bound with their own. Their story was neither mere legend nor empty fable. It was a coaxing voice reminding them to respect water's place, to keep watch over the dryness that might seep into corners of the world, corners that sometimes existed not just in the desert, but also in their hearts. The Thunderbird might be seen as a guardian above, but the same spirit must live within each person who values compassion and responsibility for all living beings. And so continued the legacy, carried in whispers through storm clouds, in each raindrop that renewed the land, and in every crack of thunder echoing through canyons at dusk. Even if the Thunderbird chose to recede back into secret realms, its presence remained a constant possibility. In the soft rumble of a coming tempest, in the sudden flash of lightning on a summer evening, the people would pause, lift their gaze skyward, and remember. The desert was alive with hidden wonders and invisible guardians, as ready to protect the land in its direst hour as it was to celebrate its rebirth when the rains finally came. And beneath that wide and watchful sky, the people lived on with renewed gratitude, bearing in their collective memory the days when the Thunderbird forged lightning arrows to triumph over a thirsting evil, thus preserving life and hope for generations yet to come.